That's been my biggest takeaway from the Tar Heels, Joe, is that they find ways to win. It's not the prettiest, but they're finding ways to win, and that just kind of stacks confidence going into the meat of ACC conference play.
We've talked about where the Tar Heels are now post their non-conference schedule.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about how they've adjusted to life without Caleb Love and how they put a lot of last year behind them. And now really what I'm looking at for Carolina from here to the NCAA tournament is Elliot Cadeau.
Mm-hmm.
And you saw some flashes last night of what Cadeau can be to help them with 11 points and 6 dimes. You saw when it doesn't always have to be RJ Davis, because in the first half, RJ struggled.
He did.
Right? Second half, though, he comes out, kind of closes that thing out, which to me is what's separating these two teams. NC State plays hard.
They do.
NC State has a good defensive mentality. It's not something we've seen under Kevin Keatts here in year 7. They play hard. They're athletic across the board, but they don't have a closer. And I think Davis is Carolina's closer. But if you can get Cadeau to add and to be that extra element, I think that's what can pop them up into Kentucky and UConn's range. If you haven't been paying attention to college basketball,
dude, everybody's
just
losing
this week. The top 3 teams lost, and not to all unbelievable teams.
Mm-hmm.
Kansas loses to UCF. Purdue loses to Nebraska, and you see Houston go on the road. Iowa State's obviously a difficult place to play. But my point in saying all of this is while Carolina has a standard, and we've seen that before, and it is the juggernaut standard, this team is not that. But who's to say they can't get into this dance and see what it looks like when the bracket opens up for them?
The buried lead for UNC season altogether is the portal giveth, the portal taketh away. You know, Steve Forbes joked about this, 2 years ago, I think it was. Sure, I wish I could find a guy like this in the portal every single year. Well, we've seen this with Hubert Davis. They had Pete Nance. And I'm not bringing up Pete Nance as to dog Pete Nance. I'm just simply saying sometimes it works out. You fit him in thinking he's going to be a replacement level for what you are missing.
Brady Manick.
Didn't work out.
Also in the portal. Yeah.
Did not work out. Now here comes Harrison Ingram, who has been a do-it-all versatile player. Usually when you talk about a versatility, you can put the guy anywhere. Sometimes it's kind of an average player. No, this guy is a motor, which I think also kind of feeds off to something they were lacking last year as well. Our friend Brian Ives over at ACC Network put this stat out there in terms of Harrison Ingram's skill last night. 19 rebounds, the most ever by a North Carolina player against NC State. Broke the record most recently matched last year by Armando Bacot with 18, who also did 18 in 2022, and then Billy Cunningham with 18 back in 1965. And last night, while everybody was asking a question about Cadeau, people were asking questions about Bacot and only having a single in this game and being off the court and everything else. You know who asked the best question last night? Steve Kirshner, Associate Athletic Director for Communications. At the end of the press conference, he just goes, so nobody wants to ask about Harrison Ingram's 19 rebounds? That's where it was on the list of all the things to be happy about when it comes to the Tar Heels, right down to the fact that they're 4-0 in ACC play.
He adds a different element. He adds a needed element. There's a lot of talk about Carolina and what Carolina basketball should be.
Yeah.
Is it the 2 bigs? Is it, is it the play as fast as you can? Is it rebound as much as you can? And obviously at the end of Roy's tenure, there was some pushback with, okay, we can't play this way anymore. We can only play with 1 big, and you got to have this stretch 4. And I think you saw the upside of that with Manick, you saw the downside of that with Nance, and now you're getting a different element with Ingram. And Tar Heels have figured it out. They win another slog. They did the same thing at Clemson. Clemson is a high-scoring team. They were able to hold them down.
I wanted to spend a little bit of time on North Carolina and defense because you mentioned NC State being 2 of 21 from 3. Sometimes, look, basketball is not a complicated game.
No, it's not. You got to make shots.
You got to make shots. Sidney Lowe, great philosopher. And when you look at the two teams, UNC and NC State last night, statistically, for the most part, they were kind of comparable with the exception of one thing. UNC hit some shots from the outside. NC State, again, at one point, I think, was that a 7% from 3 that I saw on the Jumbotron last night? Yeah, it's a little bit of a problem. But in ACC play, games against FSU, Pitt, Clemson, and NC State, teams are shooting 20 of 96 from 3, 12 of those made threes were from FSU. Pitt was 5 of 17. We all know Clemson was 1 of 18, and State was 2 of 21. Kevin Keats was asked about that defense, UNC's defense, anything they were doing differently. And Kevin Keats was kind of like, no, not really. We had some open looks. They just weren't going in. I agree with him. And even in the game against Clemson being 1 of 18, not all 18 of those shots were contested shots. Sometimes they just don't go in.
Sure.
So there's this debate going on. And Brian Ives also pointed this out too over at the ACC Network. In the last 3 games against ACC opponents, they've held these teams to 60 or fewer points for the first time since 1998, 1999. I saw somebody on Twitter joke with me about, like, so if UNC keeps winning this way, when do we start referring to the campus quad as the grounds? Because really, what's the difference between UNC and Virginia at this point? Except for the fact that maybe, I don't know, one's J. Crew, one's Brooks Brothers. I don't really know. The point is, there is this conversation that's taking place as to whether or not there's going to be a regression, that there's bad shot luck versus actual defense that's leading to these numbers that we've seen from 3. Now, typically, these 4 squads, FSU, Pitt, Clemson, NC State, are hovering around the 33% made range right now. I think Pitt is at the highest right now. No, I think Florida State is at no. I have to go back to Ken Pom and look. One of these teams is hovering around like 37% made threes right now. But the point is this sustainable? Or is this kind of stuff sustainable as the season goes on?
In ACC play, it's sustainable.
Yeah.
And again, this gets back to Carolina's standard and where they are. You know, the Kentucky and Connecticut games don't get wiped out no matter how well you play against these other teams, right? So that's the question going forward. Like I think Cadeau, huge. Ingram, huge. Winning without Baycott, also
that's
huge.
Very huge.
Because
it's very huge.
People confuse what Baycott is and what he isn't.
Yes.
And the more he is rebounding and helping and being an ancillary part as opposed to the main part, the better off they are.
Mm-hmm. My thing is, it's not all a coincidence. Like, these 4 squads aren't all just cooperating by missing shots.
No, they're playing defense.
They're actually playing defense.
You pointed this out in the second half of the Tennessee game, which is when this basically starts.
Yes.
Right? Like the second half of that game was in Hubert's terms, a yellow flag, if you will.
Yeah, you're not going to win games. It's like the same issue we have at Wake Forest, right?
Right.
It's like, hey, look, like Wake Forest, like Steve Forbes, like their pieces, but as we saw against Florida State earlier this week, you get pushed around a little bit. You have to make a stop. I mean, Florida State's going to have some problems.
You know, let's use it like an NFL analogy. But this is a little bit like the Miami Dolphins, though, a little bit, right? Like, okay, cool. You can dominate some of these other teams that you're better than. Okay, that's good. But at some point, to actually win what you want to win, that's where you get back to those stats from the Villanova game, the Tennessee game, the Connecticut game, the Kentucky game. Like that's who's in their group.
Brendan Marks brought this up over at The Athletic. Since December 29th, first game back from holiday break, UNC is number 5 in adjusted defensive efficiency nationally, according to free Ken Pom, Bart Torvik. Only behind only Houston amongst the high major teams.
Don't dismiss the Oklahoma performance either.
Yep.
69 points.
No, totally agree with you that. And then over from the UNC broadcast, Jones Angel had tweeted this out from Jody Zoigner, their statistician. NC State's field goal percentage of 26.9%, 18 of 67 is the Pac's lowest versus Carolina in the ACC era. That stuff is just not coincidental. Give North Carolina some credit. Because I saw a little bit of that last night that I wanted to push back on. Like, Carolina's playing some decent defense. So let's not try to act as though they're just getting a lot of shot luck going forward.